Good evening, Council and Library Board. Really excited to be here tonight to update everybody for the first time on the library project. We've been very busy, so there's lots to show, and I'll try to get through it fairly quickly and then leave some time for questions and answers. Is that better? Okay, I'll try to speak up. Great. Okay. So we started off at the end of, well, basically the beginning of June. We started with some programming meetings, a kickoff meeting with a large group, programming meetings with library staff, parks department folks, and city staff. And so we went back through some of the goals and priorities of the project and took a look at what was really essential for us to develop from what had been developed before, and some new ideas that had come up from the last round of study. We asked folks to put their thinking caps on and kind of imagine themselves maybe the first month or so after the project had opened, do a Yelp review of what it might feel like. So some of those comments are up there. We started looking again at all of the program spaces that were identified in the original study to make sure that we had the right number of spaces, the right size of each space, and that there weren't some things that had developed that were new, and just wanted to confirm the program. And with that program, then we started to look at adjacencies. So what spaces need to be next to each other, either physically or within close proximity. Kind of did the shell game of moving things around on paper to really start to understand how the library wants to flow, how the community center needs to work, and how those two functions want to interact together and maintain flexibility over time. We also did some parking garage tours, which doesn't sound all that exciting, but actually was pretty great. We went to 3 parking garages down in the Seattle area. They had different kinds of uses and goals for each one of them, so it was really interesting to see. They were done by KPFF, who's doing the parking garage structural, so they were able to give us a lot of great insight on, ramp, slopes, parking space dimensions, all the kinds of things that we're looking at, including the openness and lighting throughout these spaces. We also wanted to make sure we took a look at other kinds of community space that already exists in the city and make sure that we're not duplicating, but really offering another size space. And this will actually be 3 spaces. There's 2 individual rooms and then one that opens up to each other, with a goal of trying to seat 200 people for a luncheon or dinner, and then the ability to have some overflow space out into a commons area, so it could even grow from there. So really the closest thing right now is Hillcrest Park Lodge at about 200. The transit station is 95, so it's about half the size that we're talking about. So it just gives you an idea of the spaces that exist and making sure that we've got something that's new and different and is going to meet the needs of the community. Plus it's bringing them downtown where we really want activity to happen. We also started with a lot of existing conditions verification. So looking at all of the utilities that are on site. The geotechnical report has we just got the first draft of that. They did their work. We've got a survey as of a couple days ago. They've completed all of their work to date. And we actually even did a site noise test to kind of get a baseline of what the noise is in that area, so that we can look at our envelope and make sure that we're trying to reduce as much noise inside to outside. And we've been working with TSI and the city staff to go and make sure that the way we're envisioning the vehicular and pedestrian circulation around the building is conducive to the site and also all of the other planning that's been done in the sub-area plan. We've also been looking at the site context. We happen to have a model of the courthouse and Skagit admin building from back in the day when that was completed. So we have a really easy scale model to put this new building next to and really start to think about its mass and size and how we can go about breaking that down and making it fit within the context. And it's not easy because we're really limited in size of sites, so we are pushing the boundaries, but looking at ways to make that happen. And just started with early design studies, looking at the plan options, elevational options, adjacency diagrams, and all of those kinds of things, and working with our entire consultant team to provide a plan that was going to work. So on the 19th of July, we submitted our 50% schematic design set to the city. This was really the first opportunity to get kind of ink on paper, a plan that people could react to, and all of the other consultants working off that plan to look at lighting and power, fire sprinkler, structural, civil, all, everybody had their own package in this, including wayfinding and signage, and even down to the furniture, kind of preliminary furniture counts. The plan that was presented in this schematic design set was really based around sort of looking at how people flow, pedestrians primarily, into this building from 3 primary sides, and trying to create a circulation pattern inside the building that makes sense. So once you get in the building, it's clear where you are and where the opportunities are for you to move, and to really take advantage of the combination space in the middle as the knuckle that really serves a lot of different functions. And I think this space, people may look at it and say it looks like wasted circulation space, but that space, I think, for us is a highly programmed area that will be utilized an awful lot, and we can get into some of those details in a little bit. But conceptually, we've got the library on the left-hand side, community center on the right, and wanting to develop a real clear circulation pattern through the building. In terms of the site relationships, the one thing we really wanted to focus on was the safest, quickest, and most effective way to get people off the street and out of their cars. And so we looked at a pattern where the cars turn onto 3rd primarily, or come up 3rd, and enter the building from the alley off of 3rd. Really want to get them off the street and not come around and cross over multiple pedestrian paths. And also have it be clear, you'll be able to see this really from I-5, so it'll be clear kind of the minute you get off the exit, you'll know exactly where to go, and we won't need to rely on a lot of signage. It'll be quite evident. So that entryway is being studied along with the alley, which we do need for a lot of servicing of the building, and also to maintain all of the property access for the properties to the south, as well as recycling and waste and deliveries and all those kinds of things. So we're also trying to pack some landscaping onto the site. It's pretty tight, but creating some spaces, and it's not shown here, but there'll be street trees along the Kincaid Street, trying to make that the gateway to the waterfront, and soften the building edge and have a nice, pleasant building environment on all 4 sides, even the alley. The interior plan is really focused on sight lines and visibility and being able to supervise the library spaces as well as the community center. So we looked at, even though we have large sheer walls that come down all the way through the parking garage and those can't really move, we're trying to find those spaces where we can set staff up so that they have maximum supervision of all of the spaces and not have to rely on cameras or things like that. And similarly with the community space, there's an option or a space for a staff person to sit in the commons area, but we don't want to dedicate an entire office or dedicated space out there that may not be staffed all the time, but have a designated space for them, a kind of a furniture solution that works, that can be flexible, and people could use it also as the bar or informational area for different events when they get set up in that space. So we've got the restrooms here centrally located. The kitchen, I don't have a pointer with me, I apologize, is down in the central lower area as a central space. And you'll see in a minute that we've shifted a few of these things around. But primarily, the idea was to also introduce as much natural daylight as possible and eliminate, you can see most of the walls go north-south, so that we can drive light down as far as we can into the building and not interrupt them with walls or rooms. Another focus is looking at how to close the building down after hours. So either for the library, if the library wants to stay open but they don't want to have the community center open, or vice versa, how can we make sure the restrooms are available on either side for either function? And then there's been some thought put around pandemic, coronavirus type of situations with entryways that are separated and different ways to deal with curbside pickup and sanitation of fixtures and things like that. We have the 2 circulation towers at either side, similar to the previous study. Those are open to the public. They will be closed off. They'll have security gates to close off, but they basically work outside of the building footprint. So people can come and go from the garage and then enter the building. They don't have to go through the building to get out to the sidewalk, but they can be closed for security purposes. And then the parking analysis has been very thorough. We've gone through a lot of different iterations, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different configurations, trying to optimize as much as possible. Right now, you probably can't read that, but it's 277 parking stalls on the 3 floors. There is a ADA van stall and ADA regular parking on the 1st floor, and it's up near the elevator on the west side. And so there's lots of equity within the parking garage. There will be spaces for a minimum of 75 EV charging stations. There'll be some EV for electric bikes, and there'll be motorcycle parking. And the top floor maybe has the potential to have a little bit more compact parking if it's opened up for valet or permit spaces for people that live downtown. And the beauty of that too is we could stripe it normally, and then you could monitor it and wouldn't have to restripe it necessarily. But if we know who the users are, we can have it more efficient up there than it is currently striped. So we developed some very preliminary massing models that went along with this plan, trying to, again, look at breaking the scale down a little bit, especially at the corners, and just starting to kind of get into materiality and things like that. Looking at PV panels on the south side, both on the elevation of the building and up on the parking garage floor, and making sure that we have clear marquees and signage for each of the entries. And then lots of visibility, not only for people to be able to see the activities that are going inside, but for people inside to be able to see what's going on outside. Included in this set, some interior perspectives, again, fairly rough, but starting to get an idea of the types of spaces and how they start to feel with the volumes of ceiling heights and those sheer walls that we're talking about, and the windows that we have set up. Another thing we've been looking at are our sustainability targets, very important for this project. So the first one is called the EUI, which is our energy use intensity. And down on the bottom, this is a chart that represents existing buildings. So for a library or public assembly, you would expect to see about a 67 for an EUI, which might be about what the existing library is, or maybe not quite as good with the glazing that's still single pane. I'm not sure if it's been changed out or not. We are targeting 35, and code building is about a 47. So we're trying to really drive down the EUI primarily by the use of a passive house envelope, which is a high-performance, highly insulated envelope that reduces a lot of heat gain and heat loss through the thermal envelope. So it's one way it's really going to simplify our mechanical systems, make it more comfortable, make it more acoustically sound, and provide durability for the life of the building. The other area is carbon reduction. The yellow on this pie chart is the concrete. So there's a lot of carbon, embodied carbon in concrete, and that's a primary part of our structure. So we want to do things that introduce different mix types for the concrete to improve the carbon that we're using. But we don't want to forget about the smaller slices of that pie too, the other materials that we'll be using, and try to be as thoughtful as we can about reducing the global warming properties potential. This looks at carbon through kind of the life cycle of the project. So the big orange circle are all the products that will go into the project. But then there's also carbon in the operation of the building and the end of its life. So all of these things are taken into consideration, looking at what we can do to reduce carbon, not just with the first purchases, but with the life cycle of the building. And then similarly, this one looks at the different pieces. So again, that big purple area is the superstructure, mostly concrete. But the other green area is the enclosure, the first floor envelope. And so there are opportunities for us to reduce carbon in the material choices that we use there. And so we use a program called Tally and EC3 to monitor these things and look for opportunities to drive down that embodied carbon. The other thing that we're looking at, the money that came from the state, the $2 million, did come with a string attached, which was that it be LEED certified. We've put in a request that the LEED requirement be, I forget the word they use, exemption, based on the fact that in our opinion, we're going beyond LEED. And Bill's been helping on this, Bill Bullock. We've got a meeting on Friday morning with a person down at DOC to talk about getting that exemption for the reason that we're going beyond. And the important thing about that is that LEED costs money just to certify. Has nothing to do with what you buy, but it's going to cost $50,000 to $100,000 just to have us do all the documentation. And I'd rather put that money in the building and do the things that they want you to do for LEED. So hopefully that will be the case in this building. If not, we can satisfy these pretty easily, and I don't have any concerns that we can do this. It just takes time and money, and I'd rather put that time and effort into the building. We've developed an FF&E budget, which is the fixtures, fittings, and equipment, just with some preliminary things. So this will all go into the soft cost numbers that will be combined with the first estimate that I'll talk about. So we're just, counting up all the chairs and tables and sofas and developing that cost with some plug numbers and looking at all of the other impact fees and other soft costs associated with the project. And on the permitting side, we have had a great pre-app meeting with the city staff. The NEPA-SEPA process is underway. Again, by city staff is taking the lead on that. We've had conversations about the traffic concurrency, and that's underway. We will need to address some street modifications with utilities that are going in, and a rezone from public to C1. And that will allow us to have the zero lot line that was established for this project. The team is also doing stormwater analysis to look at not just what's good for this project, but what might look good kind of for the future of that district as the downflow piece before it goes into the Skagit River. And we'll also be meeting with design review staff here pretty soon to make sure that we're meeting the standards for the downtown historic area. From the 50% SD set, we received comments back from the mayor, city staff, library staff, parks people, and we're in the process of revising the plan based on those comments. One thing you'll notice is that the kitchen has moved down to the lower right-hand corner, where it can be visible from the street and have direct access from that south courtyard. Kind of trying to put eyes on that south courtyard so that we can supervise it. And so the restrooms have moved into that central area, and so they're a little bit more adjacent to the library. And looking at rotating the conference area and still being able to provide for at least 200 people seated. But the kitchen there too also helps to serve those rooms a lot easier too. There's more direct access.
Julie, where's the restrooms? I'm not seeing
Right, yeah. This whole bank here.
Okay.
So there's some gender neutral family restrooms and the men's and women's there. And a little storage room for friends. We've also been doing daylighting studies with the Integrated Design Lab. So we're looking at, this first one is a chart that basically shows you where there's 30-foot candles of light achieved 50% of the day, just natural light. So it helps us look at where our walls are, where our rooms are, where we need to drive light. The next one looks at the illuminance, which is kind of the intensity of light. So that helps us look at where we might want to have exterior shading and other, bringing in light in different areas. So really working kind of three-dimensionally through the natural light patterns here too. And then again, kind of back to the model, looking at how this building relates to what's happening across the street and within that corridor. So looking at modulation that sort of addresses the front of the courthouse, the space between the admin building and the courthouse, and the two corner entrances to the building, as well as the back, because the back is really a prominent elevation as you come up third. So, and it's also the opening for the garage, so we want to have kind of a marquee there that addresses that vantage point as well. So the model is developing. We're starting to look again, like I said, at materiality, form, how this feels on the street, and how it's going to feel to both pedestrians and people who are driving here for the first time. These are a little dark, but again, just development again of the interior spaces. This is the children's room on the left and the friends area on the right, which is just outside the youth services. This is a capture shot of the community space when the dividing wall is open, and a shot kind of outside that overflow area into the commons. So in terms of schedule, we got a bit of a late start with our contract starting basically in June. And we're taking a little bit of time to get the plan right. So we can see that we're kind of promoting a little bit of a shift, but we feel like it's sort of the adage, start slow to go fast. We want to make sure that we've got the plan really locked in and everybody's comfortable with it. And then we can work very efficiently to get the drawings up to speed. The next deliverable for us is 100% schematic design on September 8th, and that will have the first round of costing included in that. I've also been working a bit with the city on funding, helped with some information on the RAISE grant that went in recently that the mayor submitted, and I've been tracking that along with the city, and I believe at that next deliverable we'll have an update on the complete fundraising package to date. And related to that, we helped assist with a funding video that Brand Query did under our contract. This was geared towards two different audiences, the federal grant opportunities, as well as local fundraising. So they'll be developing 2 different campaigns to help raise money for the project. And we've started a monthly update. The first one was pretty busy. We had a lot to do in June, but we're putting together our draft for July. These are up on the city's website, so we'll continue every month to try to update folks and let them kind of see what's going on with the project, and also ask any questions if they have them of us. So with that, I'd entertain any questions. Or Mayor, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
After they're done, I'll come up.
Okay.
Any questions from council? Any questions from library board?
Julie, just a question. I know you guys are, of course, thinking about it, but keen to make sure that it's not a library with not a garage with a library attached to it, but rather a real library with a lot of parking to get off the surface. So how are you guys addressing that? I saw some of the mock-ups, it looks like there's some there, and then others it's not, so.
Can you rephrase your question just a bit, what your goal is?
The goal would be for it to be a library that has parking, not a parking garage that has a library attached to it.
Right, okay. So I think for us, we look at this as a civic building. And for us, that means the focus is on the functional pieces of it on the ground floor. So a lot of the massing and the entrances are geared towards those functions. And really, we want that to be what you're seeing when you come down the street. That it's the library, it's the kitchen function. But we also do want to make it evident where you go to park.
Sure.
So that signage will want to be somewhat prominent, but it's going to be secondary to what you see when you come down the street. That's our goal. Yes?
I'm not sure what you have thought about or planned or already, eliminated for the use of the roof. Have you thought about green roofs or a destination up there? It would be a lovely view.
Yes. So we do have, the only issue with putting assembly spaces on the top level is that it significantly impacts the structural loading. Believe it or not, people weigh more than cars when they're calculated. So if we add an assembly space up on the top floor, we add a lot of weight that has to be distributed down through those columns. So for the couple of times a year that might happen, we're a little bit hesitant to make that a big feature up there. But we are trying to address some rooftop terrace on the second floor. Go back to one of these. And then a perch from the west end so that you could see out over the city.
And does the elevator go up to the roof?
It does not. Well, I'm sorry, it does. It goes to the top level of parking, yes. So above the, sorry, get to the right. View here. So we've got a rooftop terrace above the community space on the east side, and there's actually, we took the drone up, to the top level, and then below, there's very nice views out to Little Mountain and that way. And then similarly, at the stair tower on the west side, there's a smaller little perch there where you could get views out to the river. But we don't have enough area unless we build another roof to put a green roof on. But we will be looking at ways to do a cool roof, so we can reflect as much heat as possible from that rooftop.
Any other questions?
I just want to say that we talked about the green, a space on the roof that we thought it would be awesome to have a garden or something up there. So that was something that we discussed in council too. Just want you to know that we're on the same page.
It's always, if we get the first costing back and we're below budget, I'd be happy that we're saying that. I think too, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to add that I noticed there's a lot of open space, which is flexible space. I know a number of the council has gone down and visited some different libraries, and we saw the benefit of that flexible space where they can do different things. You know, at 9 o'clock in the morning, you show up at a library in Seattle, and there's a lineup of people waiting to go use those spaces. Grandparents taking their grandkids. Grandparents are reading a newspaper, and grandkids are participating in some kind of a program. So I'm happy to see all the flexible spaces in there that will be utilized.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Would you point out where the solar panels are located?
Yeah, let's see if I can get a good. So there's a shot of it here, but the entire south elevation has, there'll actually be another row that's not shown here. They're both shading devices and solar PVs, so you're getting the benefit of cooling the cars that are parking there. And then there is a section up on the roof that is framed that has panels on it, so again, there'll be a little bit of shaded area on the top level.
And how much will that contribute to the electric of the building itself?
Those numbers are still under study. By the new energy code, you have to show that your building can support 40% of the roof area. And our goal is to go beyond that if we possibly can. But electrical is doing the calculations right now on how many panels we can support on the building in different places, what that accumulates to in terms of power production, and then what kinds of things do we want to power that with? Do we want to drive it to the to the EV charging stations, or a portion of it to lighting, and so on and so forth. So in that 100% SD set, we'll have all of that information.
Thank you.
You bet.
This may be a really weird question. I mean, I noticed all these schematics very monochromatic. So like what, is there gonna be some sort of design element? Because I think, going back to his question, yeah, when I looked at it, I was
Yes.
like, oh wow, that's a parking garage. But I can imagine, you know, with
Right.
color.
We do have those. We're not quite there yet, and we want to be. Well, there's two reasons really. For us, working in grayscale helps us concentrate on the form, and we don't get locked in on materiality and kind of lose focus on the actual shape of the building and the push and pull. And then when we start to add materials, we want to be really cautious about what we put out in the world, because those images kind of stick in people's minds. So we want to kind of nail it down on what we're proposing, and we'll have those out very soon. But and those will be open for discussion too, because there'll be costs associated with different material choices. There's carbon associated with different choices, and then there's just the context of the downtown, what feels right, what's going to be durable and easy to maintain, things that aren't graffiti attractive versus a graffiti attractive, all those kinds of considerations. So that'll be all up for discussion.
Any additional questions?
I have one quick question. Thank you. So this is more of a curiosity question that derived from last week. Just last week we saw there was an earthquake off of Alaska, right? And we know that there's seismic activity around, and the plate of Juan de Fuca is not too far from here. So with that in mind, is that something that that should be explored, not explored? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, great question. So we do have soils here that are not great. And part of the geotech study and working with our structural engineers is to come up with a foundation recommendation that works for any kind of seismic event. So we have to, by code, design that in no matter what direction we take. But what we're leaning towards is called ground improvements. So instead of driving piles down and then connecting the slab to the piles and making a structural slab, we're talking about sort of coring down into the ground 16 feet or so and filling it back up with rock at about a 4 to 6 foot interval. So basically kind of improving the ground as it indicates, and making the whole pad structurally sound and not vulnerable to seismic event. So that slab on the ground can be much less expensive, and it's less expensive than driving piles. And it gives you a base of the building that's very strong and is not going to shake like some of the soils that are around, even between those piles. So yes, it's a serious issue that is driving a lot of the structure behind the project.
Thank you.
Good question, thank you.
Any additional questions? Isaac, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yep. So I'd just like to say that I think that HKP, there we go, first, all the acronyms, has done a really good job at expressing the library programming goals while keeping into that whole cost picture in place. And, I also agree with you that there would be nice to see a building with actual cladding, because I do care about how the building fits into the downtown corridor, and a giant concrete monstrosity as it looks now does not look like we want. But I can see the intentionality behind these designs and how they'll turn out, and I think that one of the things that people will see when we get to 100% schematic design is a building that not only is very inviting from the outside, but very inviting to be inside, taking into consideration to all those pieces of community feedback we've heard over the years, whether it be good children's space or good community space or parking garage that doesn't feel like it's filled full of killer clowns. It will be that wonderful space I think people will enjoy and really be a good beacon for the community. So, yeah, I'm impressed, and thank you to Julie for your work and working together as a team.
Thank you, Isaac.
Yeah.
So, at this time, I'd like to invite the mayor to come forward. She's got some financing options or some plans for us to, or for her to share with us.
Okay, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see the library supporters, the board and the foundation members that are here, so thank you so much for being here. I wanted to give just a little bit of background on sort of the city staff's roles. So to date, we've got a long way to go, but just to give you a flavor of the work that goes on with the city staff. So HKP, when they embarked on their work, set up monthly or weekly Monday morning meetings where they're presenting an agenda and then going through the work that they've done, looking for direction or decision making. And so on those meetings, it's myself, Isaac is on there, our city engineer, Bill Bullock, and 4 members of our development services staff. So it's literally every single Monday, we're given tasks to do, review for that next week. So it moves really fast, and honestly, it's a little scary because you're just so excited about the project, but you don't want to mess it up and make bad decisions. And so it's been really great to have Julie and her team as a partner, understanding that and knowing how we want to do it right. So, hence a little bit of a shift before that next 100% design, because it's when you get this huge stack and you've got to have feedback in a week, we want to do it right. So we'll take the time we need. The other thing that I'm super excited about is having those monthly updates. So those are gonna start being attached to the mayor's e-newsletter if you're on that list. Isaac will push those out through his library communications, and then they'll be posted on the city website. So it's mountvernon.gov. And then you scroll a little bit down, there's a whole Mount Vernon Library Commons tab. So if you click in there, you can find a ton of information on that. Also, the idea, some of the things that you've brought up, I love it because it feels like we all have the same real desire. So that whole rooftop issue, it adds from the first study we did, it could be over $1 million to do event space because of the engineering or things like that. So literally we're kind of bated breath for that 100% design and the dollar amount, but also hearing back from some of the funding things that we've put in for, because if we raise more than what we targeted, then we have options down the road. One of the things too with some of those outdoor spaces is the idea of this sort of sky deck that Julie briefly mentioned. That would be on the west side of the building, and that would overlook the river, maybe the Olympics and all that on a good day. So we hear you. We love the whole idea, and it kind of depends on as we move through with funding. So, all right. What I wanted to share is, I'm gonna not do this right. it showing on my screen? Someone can come help me, I'm getting the right screen showing on here, I guess. Okay, right now, in the whole grand scheme of start to finish, I just had a little graphic that says we've gone through our preliminary assessment, we've gone through the site control with Skagit County, now we're in design and engineering. When that is complete, scheduled to be spring of next year, is when we have the opportunity, if we have the funding, that then we go to construction. It'll be a little bit of a miracle if that happens, but it's still a chance. And so after that, you know, we're looking at probably a year and a half of construction. There we go. Thanks. So in the whole grand scheme of things, we're not sitting back waiting to have money drop in our lap. We've done a lot of work on that. So I wanted to just share a little bit of what we've got going. So Julie mentioned the RAISE grant application. This is the U.S. Department of Transportation grant. And it is a program that's funded to date of about $1 billion that goes out into the entire country. It's highly, highly competitive. And so at first, some folks were skeptical that we put in for the application, but we were really encouraged by our senators, so Senator Murray's office and Senator Cantwell's office, to, you don't know unless you try it. And so that application went in. It was for $15 million, and the way we tailored that is because we're asking for it to pay for the transportation component of the project. The project has a library and a community center and a commercial kitchen, but it also has a transportation project, part of it, which is parking. It's considered transit adjacent to Skagit Station, and so that's a big tie-in for park and ride use in the future with that expansion. And it also has an electric vehicle charging floor of 75 spaces. It would be the third largest EV charging site in the United States when this is accomplished, only behind Tesla's world headquarters and then the Port of Oakland. So it's a very visionary goal that aligns with federal government goals and vision for EV infrastructure, the state of Washington goals for EV infrastructure, Puget Sound Energy's goals for infrastructure, and the entire West Coast Electric Highway, which includes British Columbia and the western states. So it's a big transportation component, whether you have thought about that before or not. So it's highly competitive. Right now we're waiting for the ranking of that application. So what US DOT does is they accept everything, they give them rankings, and then after those rankings, it's given to the Transportation Secretary, which is Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and it's his sole discretion on decision-making on the projects that he picks. As you can imagine, it gets like a little political slugfest when it gets to those, so our goal is to be highly rated, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we're positioning ourselves to be highly competitive in the political arena, because this is a project, when I'm talking to many different jurisdictions, that no one else is doing anything like it, and so we think it's visionary. So, the other thing is that potential right now. So you may have followed just the Senate work around infrastructure. The Senate bill that's being negotiated right now would add $7 billion to the RAISE grant program. Currently, there's $1 billion to give out, and so if you do the math, that's an incredible exponential amount of funding that could then help our chances with projects that are submitted under the RAISE program. All right, the RAISE grant application is actually on our website. If you'd like to look through 28 pages of literal tears and joys and I would say blood and sweat as well. Isaac did a phenomenal job bringing forward some, you have to do benefit cost analysis math on that, so he was able to really support me writing the application. Could have done it without him, so please take a look at it if you're interested in that application. You find that again, mountvernon.gov, and then click on the comments tab. But I wanted to show the council and the board and our community the amount of support for the application. Remember that political part of it? The supporters play very largely in the minds of our congressional delegation on how they help push projects forward. They like to see support. So Congresswoman Del Bene has submitted a letter of support. We also are awaiting Senator Cantwell and Senator Murray's letters. They've indicated they're supporting as well. We had our state legislators step up and send a letterhead from the state legislature. So Senator Lovelit, Representative Lakanoff, Bramwell, and Paul. Washington Conservation Voters, so that's a wing of the National Conservation Voter Group that are very interested. They don't normally do letters of support, but when I was able to talk about the project, they felt it very strongly, but they would like to see something done in our state, so they send a letter of support. Sustainable Connections is also a group that supports real environmental conscious sort of building and projects. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, I'll talk about that in a minute and that connection, but they sent a letter of support. Puget Sound Energy provided a letter, and then our traditional real good friends in our community, so the Port, School District, Chamber, Mount Vernon Downtown Association, Skagit Valley College. And just a few more. So the Samish Indian Nation provided a letter of support. Of course, our beloved Mount Vernon Library Foundation support. Brentsville Hospitality Consulting, so that's a private consulting group, a local person that does hospitality hotel consulting. Visconsi Companies, who has invested over $20 million in our community. EDAS, and of course Skagit Transit is a real key partner on this, pushing forward the transportation funding. So when we're looking at all the other opportunities of places to go, the RAISE grant is only one application. And what is so unique about our project is that it really, what's unique and maybe a detriment, it doesn't fit neatly into one service, one public service. So you can see we're building civic building, we're building infrastructure, we're building EV charging, we're doing a real incredible climate conscious, way beyond any codes that are required. So we have solar, we have library as a service, we have broadband connectivity, so there's broadband funding there. Our community center or senior services could be a place of funding. Rural development and a workforce training site. If we were to partner with Skagit Valley College Culinary Program, that they could use our commercial kitchen at times, or if there's any workforce training that could use community center rooms, etc. Those are all the areas that we're going after and looking for funding. Council, thank you again for letting us hire Johnston Group, which is a lobbying firm. Met with them for an hour today, and they identified several different, about 6 different grants that we're gonna start looking to apply for around all of these different areas. I wanted to talk about some other opportunities that may not be grant funded, but they certainly contribute to the financial ability to complete the project. I don't think it's too early because I was super excited. I met with the electrical apprentice training program that's here in Mount Vernon. It's off of Anderson Road. A lot of folks maybe don't know about what this program is. It is funded by the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and it's a nationwide program that trains apprentice electricians. In our community, they take folks that are interested. It's essentially free, and it's about a 5-year program. I think it's 8,000 hours that folks have to go through and then become journeyman electricians. And it's funded by the unions, and it was started, years and years ago. So when I went through their training program, I got excited about for young people that this is an opportunity. But I said, how could we marry the apprentice program with EV charging stations? Could they come install our EV charging stations for us? And so now we're exploring the idea of the union, the journeymen and the apprentices coming in and doing that work for us, celebrating their own local project, but then giving an opportunity for the public to maybe come watch and learn about what EV charging is, learn about what the apprentice program is. And so those are those partnerships that I think make it even more like heartfelt project for our community that folks are helping us. So that's my gift. The utility infrastructure requirements. So Puget Sound Energy is our utility, and there's franchise agreements that talk about them participating in infrastructure. Some of their needs can be met, and so we want to make sure we're partnering to see how they can participate. Utilities portion of the project, so this is a little more detail on council. So we've got stormwater, we've got wastewater, we've got surface water, so they have a part to play in helping to fund their rightful components of the project, as well as road improvements. So maybe it's an overlay of Kincaid Street, our TBD money, as you know. And then the workforce training funding is just an idea that we're starting to explore. How can we look at partnering? Maybe it's the bread lab. that needs space in a kitchen environment. Maybe it's a teen apprentice program around technology that we can use our teen center and technology component that we can compete for some dollars there. So we're really looking at every possible partner for funding. And then lastly, I just thought I would show you where we're at as of today. So on the left side, you'll see dollar amounts that we've identified that would support the project. So you'll see it, bottom it comes down to $33.352 million. Our goal is 45. The secured box has little check marks on everything that is completely secured at this point. And then the source you'll see, and then we've broken it out into years, what we need for this year and what we'll need going forward in 2022. So right now, we feel like we've identified $33.352 million. Huge thanks to WashDOT for coming through with some EV design funding. That was really championed by Representative Lukanoff in the legislature to help us with that. Our state funding with library capital grants, and then a previous $1 million grant, so $3 million from our state so far, so that's awesome. Skagit County recently awarded the project $500,000 from the Rural Development Grant funding. And then we've got a few more things that we could tap into. We haven't just, kind of maybe started the CDBG loan application yet, and I'll explain that in just a minute why. So on the bottom, you'll see the still need is about 11.6. So here are things that are out there, is we know that Skagit County would want to support us again next year with $500,000, so we'll be applying for that. Our federal government grant, so that's the RAISE funding, we're asking for $15 million there. And then our congressionally directed spending, so that is the new name for earmarks through the Congress. And so we're super proud of Representative Del Bene, who's championed our request. It made it all the way from her office through committee and passed by the entire House of Representatives, so it's sitting there waiting for the Senate to take action on other congressionally directed spending decisions. And so you never, we don't know, it's not secured yet, but it made it a long way, and so we're thrilled about that. So you might be going, okay, wait, if we get all that money, that's way more than $45 million, right? And so what we would want to do, and the priority, and I've mentioned this to council, but I think they would agree that when we can get other funding, we can back out any local funding. So maybe we back out the lodging tax revenue, and that goes back into, lodging events that we can do, right? Or maybe the CDBG loan, we don't need that CDBG loan, and that can remain, so you can see how it's kind of a puzzle piece to get to that final dollar amount. So that's just where we're at today. When I'm able to explain this to, say, our federal delegation, they're really, really proud of us. The money now is what they call that last in to get to a groundbreaking, and that's very attractive for our federal delegation to help with. So that's where we are today. So any questions from council or the library board?
Obviously, on that grant we're going after, when it comes to ranking, what typically, I know there's obviously all kinds of different sizes of projects going up to possibly $7 billion, but where would we have to be? Where you
So
if 50 and under, 100 projects or under, is it thousands?
we want to be rated as highly recommended. And the highly recommended would come from internally to the U.S. Department of Transportation. They have, I think, 4, maybe 5 different committees that look at the application. So they'll have engineers look at the application. They'll have the economists look at the application. That's where they want to see these basic sort of benefit cost analysis that you have to provide. And then they'll look at, so it goes through internally, and then they're ranked as, I think, highly recommended, and then, I don't know, you didn't do a great job, I'm not sure, but we're looking for that highly recommended ranking. And we're hoping to know that sometime in either September or early October. And then that's where our federal delegation, our senators right now are some of the most powerful senators there from their longevity. So that's where we really want to know that they're supportive and very vocally supportive of to Secretary Buttigieg. But we'd love him to come to Mount Vernon too. So.
That's my question. When do we start asking him.
When do we start
When do
Twitter
we start
stalking him?
letter writing campaigns or whatever?
Thank you for bringing that up, because I forgot about it, hope for that. I talked to Isaac today, because what we'd like to do is definitely send a formal letter of thanks to Congresswoman Delveni for her work for us. But I think what's super important for anyone listening, for our board or for the foundation, for kids that want our library, that writing handwritten cards of support and thank you is gonna be important. So we'll get out the information on where to send those. You can also send a letter of support for the Raise Grant Foundation to an email. And so that is exactly the action that I would love to have our community start doing. And so Isaac and I'll figure out a way to get that to you, and please just take a minute to send those letters. Yep.
Do you need more letters from larger organizations? I know they're gonna be, there's a urgent care and some other things that are gonna be adjacent to there. Could Skagit Regional Health sort of put their 2 cents in?
They absolutely could, and it's something I'll follow up on. When we looked at doing the Raise Grant application, I was fortunate to talk to several other cities that have done them and got their applications, so I could kind of see what, they did. And by far, we have more support than what I've seen, which I think is a good thing. One city, Richfield, received a Raise Grant last year, and one of their tips was that was one of the biggest things that when they debriefed with the DOT staff was the amount of support from the varying level of support. So that's why we really chased after the unusual letters like Washington Conservation Voters or the IBC and that kind of stuff, because we really showed that demonstrate not just sort of our local community, who of course is gonna want the project, but that wider group. So anything that we look at, and the more better. Yeah. So.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
we really appreciate the presentation and the creativity on the funding.
We'll see if it works.
All right, so this time I'd invite the library committee to look and adjourn their meeting. And then the council will take up our next capital project.
All right, we'll adjourn the meeting for the library board of trustees with our thanks.
Thanks,
everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, moving forward, I'm going to invite Chief Price to come forward and talk about the improvements to stations 2 and 3.
I'll walk out with you guys. Oh, we haven't gotten it yet.
I know, but I'm sorry, you did terrific.
You gotta get Doug up here on the hot seat too.
You set?
You need to get Doug up here on the hot seat, because we're gonna ask him all kinds of questions.
I'll leave him in the back for now. It's better off there. First, I'll start off with thank you, and I apologize for the white font on some of the timeline arrows. I think part of that is the projector and a little bit of the lighting here in that. So tonight, I just want to kind of give you an update of where we're at and kind of review back through the timeline. Taking feedback from the last time, I think I showed you a timeline that had this little bitty font on that big Gantt chart that we're working off of. I kind of streamlined everything and put them into the bigger steps that are associated with it, and I'll save all the little details to the staff and I. So where we're at, and you'll kind of see some similarities here, we're working on these projects jointly. So stations 2 and 3 are being developed jointly to a point, and we'll kind of carve that out here in just a moment. So right now, if you look at it, we finished up the schematic design. We finished that up on July 16th. So again, you heard Julie talking about that with the Library Commons project, of where that's that. What's the foundational look at things? What's the functionality needs of everything else? And so we were able to wrap those pieces up. Along that way, now we're in the site plan SEPA review piece of that. That's in process. That's expected to be completed by October 21st. It's right on schedule, no delays there. We've gotten all the reports back we needed, and that's all moving forward. Our next phase that we're in right now is that design development. That's taking that schematic design, putting more details to it, getting down to the materials, how's that actually going to look, what do we need to be putting in there and that. So that's in process, and we're expecting that to be completed around the October 6th timeline on both of the projects. And then we get into the construction documents, and again, those are kind of that refinement from that design, now to that formal architectural where you see the typical big stack of the 36 by 48 foot pages where folks are flipping through them with all the details and the notes. And those are needed so we can get to that next phase, which is the permitting. And that's where we start to see the divergence between stations 2 and 3. When we approached this project, we discussed, going at permitting and doing that all at the same time. We had good feedback from McKenzie about the benefits of doing the permitting for one of the stations first and then saving the second one for a little bit later. Part of the rationale behind that, as we go through that permitting, if there's notes, if there's revisions, now we're making that on just the one project, and we can make those revisions ahead of time, and that will actually save us time and save us money when we go to do that for Fire Station 2 as well. So that permitting, we're looking to anticipate to start that around December 17th, finishing that somewhere around March 11th, depending on how many revisions we need to make with regard to that. And again, I'm on the Station 3 part. And then start our construction biddings somewhere around January 20th, and then get those all back by March 30th. And then we get into the construction piece of that. If you look down on Station 2, that's got a slightly delayed time frame where we're going to start the permitting. It's somewhere around the time before the construction of Station 3 is finished. And then we'll do that, we'll do our bidding part, and then do our construction after Station 3 has been completed. We're going to need to do that just so that we have room for staff that has to be relocated from Station 2 to Station 3 during that interim period where it's disrupted because of some of the admin services and so forth and so on. I will say right now, compared to where we started with our timeline, we're about 4 weeks behind. And if you look at the size and the scope of this project, that's pretty good considering all things that have to go into that. And I'll give you a simple example, and I think Julie touched on it, and so did the mayor a little bit. When we get our weekly meeting and they say, here's this item that we'd like you to review and give us feedback on, they want an answer right then. And partly I have to say, I'd love to tell you that today. However, I gotta go back to the rest of the firefighters, get their input on this, or more importantly, sometimes I have to go back to the mayor, chase her down and make sure I can get the feedback on that piece of it and say, yeah, that's okay, we can go ahead and use that. So we, as the city, are sometimes creating some of those delays in there, which is what I think is the appropriate place for those delays, as you heard the mayor. We want to do it right, and we're taking the same approach here with our fire station project as well. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about, and you know what, I should probably, I don't know if you can see that well enough, but I had that in your handout packet from before, so I'll kind of, direct you to that. It might be easier to read. I have that in there more just as a visual aid of things to talk about. And so when we were going through this project and we started the needs assessment way back in 2018, there was this little thing called COVID that we had not anticipated to be around. I'll say good and bad. What COVID did is it opened our eyes to something that we weren't really looking at. And now we're thinking of things a little bit differently from the fire safety perspective of that. We had designed our stations with some of those decon corridors and those clean zones and those dirty zones, thinking about the contaminants from fires. But maybe we weren't thinking about how does that play out inside of the workspace, inside of that green zone, where the firefighters spend a lot of their time, in those offices, in those living spaces, kitchens. So with that, when we engaged McKenzie, we brought forward some ideas about how can we add to increased safety. And so we've kind of titled those the COVID items. So that handout that I provided to you is kind of those COVID items and the cost associated with some of those, and that is the HVAC system. So one of the big costs, and if you think about it in a context, is the easiest, I shouldn't say easiest, one of the efficient ways to do a system is you have an air conditioner, an HVAC system, and you have all this ducting, and it puts out the air and it circulates through everywhere. The problem with that is the intake and where that air circulates, it crosses rooms, it crosses barriers and so forth. So if you're trying to protect folks, you really want to compartmentalize that. And so what we talked with the mechanical engineering folks is, can that system be there so that the person who's in one sleeping quarters, if they happen to get sick, they're not breathing through the night, spreading that to their counterpart in the next room or in the offices, or admin staff bringing it over to the work staff, the public bringing it into the staff as well. So that's one of the components that's adding to some of the cost pieces with this. The other things that are in there is those, I call it those simple things, door hardware, the faucets, the touchless systems, any way we can start to eliminate contact with materials or other personnel. And so we brought those things in there. And then along with some of those things that create that spacing associated with some of our offices to kind of keep folks separated with that. So again, this is kind of a summary of what that is. And if you look at that, it's at the bottom there, you see the commodity escalation cost. That is something they added in is if you haven't noticed lately, costs for materials and building have gone up considerably. So what they did in their cost estimations, they want to make sure that we don't sell ourselves short by the time it comes to bidding and say, oh, we didn't realize that the prices were going to either continue to grow or the construction folks were going to anticipate that. So if you look at that, the total additional for kind of the COVID-related stuff is about 1.6 million with that escalation built in, somewhere around 1.1 without that escalation in there. So somewhere in between there is where that COVID cost stuff is. Again, I will direct you back to the document that was handed out in your packet more so than the slide here. But again, this should be a familiar look to that where we have the construction costs, the consultant costs, and then our owner consultant costs. When we got these costs back in, I think it was mid-June, somewhere around the 22nd of June, 26th of June, the price tag that you see there at the bottom was a bit higher, and I will say a bit higher. So we spent the last 6 weeks going over that and looking at, is there things within this that we can value engineer? Are there things in here that we say, what if we changed? And with that, we were able to, I'll say, be as efficient as we can, and we got the cost down to a project cost of $10,996,000 as an estimate. If you add that escalation kind of piece in there that you see at the bottom there for product escalations, about $11.4 million there. Examples of some of the things that we looked at that we made changes are, initially we had the museum where the historic apparatus was up there at Station 2. We had that programmed in there. There was never a question really from our minds, or as you remember back to the Station 1 dialogue, is that apparatus really belongs down at Station 1. Firefighters are very emotional. We get very attached to things. And so that was programmed into Station 2 because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't being forgotten. I think when we got our pricing back, that had us go back to have a really good conversation, say, we should mothball or store that for a period of time until we can get Station 1 built and program that in there. The pros and cons of that, you know, just to be honest with the council, is the firefighters' concern was, well, what if we never build Station 1? What if we build Station 1, but then somebody wants to cut the funding from that side of it? And, you know, it was all meant in a positive fashion. So we came to an agreement. We completely believe that, you know, it will be built into Station 1 and that will happen. That is where the need is. So with that, what we were able to do is program that out. That helped drop a lot of the cost of that, not just from that simple square footage, but roof lines, how they had to be engineered, how they had to be designed and tied back in. We shaved a few other feet here or there, and I do mean feet. Literally, it was 2 feet off of the back wall and a foot off of another wall that we just kind of shrunk the envelope where as much as we could, and we tried to be as realistic as possible without really hurting ourselves. Up at Station 3, one of the big places where we, I'll say made a big realignment is, if going back to the original pictures, there was another full apparatus bay in there, and in the back portion of that was our EMS storage, our bunker gear storage, and equipment room. We had dialogue about how many apparatus would we need there, what if we used the existing inside and only made a half a bay for the additional ambulance that would need to be up there. You know, I had a question from one of the council members, well, is that going to hurt us in the long run? I don't believe it is. You know, the full bay obviously is providing for that longer term look, but by the time we would get to needing that extra space in totality, we would need additional bunk rooms, additional living space, so we would be having to be addressing a bigger problem to begin with. And so I think moving that in there, what that saves us is exterior wall, which is always more costly than interior walls, and then again, just kind of shrunk up our envelope best we can. I feel that we have done our due diligence over the course of the last 6 weeks, along with the rest of the project, to get our pricing down to the best that we can with regard to this. And I think if you look at that COVID piece of the $1.6 million, if you look at the price escalation that's going on in the economy right now and just the time, I think that's as close to our target as I can get us right now, pending any direction from the council to go back and remove other stuff of that. I'll pause right here to answer any questions with regard to that part of the process or where we're at.
So I'm just gonna state, you know, the council kind of gave you a rough budget to work within. There's some factors that come into play, building materials, the COVID issues. I think you've done a great job of getting that project down to something we can work with. I think you've cut back as much as you possibly can. There was unanticipated costs that none of us knew about when we first started talking about a budget, and you're really close. So the only other question I'd have is any of the COVID-related building project, is that be able to be funded through the Recovery Act?
Yeah.
So we'd be able to take 1.5 million from recovery if we needed to? There's not that much there.
I mean, absolutely, as we go through, you know, that next year of budgeting, all of that, and then everything plays out, it's absolutely available.
So one of the things we learned, and you know, Doug can chime in if it need be, but one of the things we learned is it wasn't the can those funds be used for this project or not, but it is how is the auditor going to look at those, and are they familiar enough with what the federal government is saying you can use these funds for versus that. And that's where this document, I think, is going to really be that asset. So if you look at those top pieces, they're very tangible, very easy to see, the HVAC, mechanical system, door hardware, all those pieces. And then you get down to that second part and we talk about the administrative restroom separation, the decontamination room, the transition vestibules. Those are a little bit softer in their square footage because it's real hard to say what is all going in there until we get down to what material was needed to build that. But those are other examples that if the level of detail is needed by the time we got there, we would know how many 2x4s, what kind of material went into building that into that design piece of it. So again, as Mayor said, we feel pretty comfortable with that.
And just a reminder, we're looking at the GMT money as a funding source for this. So I guess my next question would be for Doug. We're looking at roughly a $12 million budget. We've budgeted about $900,000 a year coming from GMT.
I have 900 plugged in as a projection for each year, yes.
Okay. So will that cover service of debt?
So
$900,000 a year service the debt on a $12 million bond.
So
Yes.
Okay.
knowing something like that was coming forward, I had Doug pull up some numbers and get us some information back from our bond counsel.
I told you needed him up here.
He gave me, I was trying to handle it myself. But again, here are just the scenarios of what it looks like with a $10 million, $11 million, and $11.5 million bond associated with that. And again, that goes back to, is that having to fund the entire project? Is there a Recovery Act money that could be utilized for that? Again, and there's another little subtlety that I'll say that, you know, quite didn't highlight. Up in the top part, there's all those engineering of the soft costs and the A&E. That's being done right now with the current funds coming out of that GMT. So that's stuff that's going to come off of that. The other little subtlety piece that I'll point out, there's about $400,000 in permit fees that we're going to pay, but we're going to show that as revenue on the backside. So while it is a cost that comes into this, there's also a revenue source on the backside of that to help with that. It's just a subtlety that's just kind of can get buried sometimes in those nuances.
We'll have sales tax revenue from that also.
Yeah, and
So,
sorry.
And just a comment on this here, and so these amounts right here, we're talking about, it's double A rated, 20-year term, and non-bank qualified, assuming that this was assuming that we would probably be going out for 2 bonds next year. What are the chances of that? I don't know, probably not so good, but if that's the case, the percentages you're seeing here will probably go down another, at least they said about 20 basis points, so for even better numbers, so.
And then we had a conversation with our bond counsel, we had a conversation with Mackenzie about when is the timing that we should be looking at doing the bond. And their recommendation is that we wait until we do our construction bidding and we get our costs back. And that way then we'll have a better understanding of how much are we needing to borrow right off of the get-go versus we use that estimate, which is a good estimate. It's on the, I don't know if it's conservative or aggressive side of the high end, hopefully, of those projections, trying to add in all those things so that you don't err and say, oh, we didn't ask for enough. And so that's where we're recommending is we do that. And that, going back to that timeline, that would be somewhere around the February, March timeframe of next year where we would get those back. And that's when we would go out to the bond council for that bonding.
And that process takes about 3 months from when they get those projections, and we can start moving on.
And my biggest concern is we have this funding source, this grant money is coming from the federal government. We can dedicate that for this, and it services the debt. That's been my biggest concern, is we're able to service the debt with that bond source. There's no city money going into the project, it's all grant funding, so. Any other questions for the chief, or
Just last slide.
anybody want to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do this? or-
Do it.
So again, just the next steps, continue with the processes outlined. We'll update, I have right now programmed in for Mackenzie to come in either October or November when we get through that DD side of things and kind of get a little bit firmer picture of how it looks to present that back to the council of that. And then proceed with following the bonding following the construction bids. So with that.
I'd just like to say, Chief, I appreciate the transparency on it. I appreciate the work that you've done on it. We've met a couple times. Councilmember Hudson's met with you. It's been a good experience, and it's been very transparent, and I think everybody knows exactly what's going on. So I appreciate that, working with council on that.
That's our goal. All right, thank you.
I'm glad we voted to take over EMS. It found us a very good funding source. That was a brilliant move.
Only took 15 years.
Who agreed to do this?
Better late than never.
All right. Thank you, Chief Price. Is there anything under the good of the order? Hearing none, I would ask the city attorney if there's a need for an executive session.
We do need to enter into an executive session with the mayor and the city council for 30 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters relating to litigation, potential litigation, or enforcement actions to which the city, the governing body, or a member acting in their official capacity is or is likely to become a party. When public knowledge regarding such discussion will likely result in either adverse legal or financial consequence to the city. 30 minutes, we would end at approximately 7:50. This would be pursuant to RCW 4230.10 subsection 1I, and no final action after.
Okay, I would adjourn council into executive session at 7:21.